Hey everyone, it's Iggy, and today I'm going to show you guys how to paint wings in Photoshop. If you watched my last two tutorials, you know that we've already gone over how to paint feathers, specifically single feathers. But now we're ready to kind of go in and paint actual full wings. To be specific, angel wings. But in my case, I don't do fluff, so these are going to be darker. As you can see, my image is much, much darker than what would be required of an angel. So obviously, if you're going to follow along with me, you're going to want to render ready. I already have one in here. And just to quickly explain what I have going on in my scene, my render is actually rendered to a PNG. So if you're using DS or Poser, you're going to want to render it to a PNG so that it retains the transparency. This is so that you can actually get in front and behind the main character. Just to show you real quick what I have going on here, you can see that this is completely transparent. And I've already done all the post work to my image that I'm going to do and so forth. So I am actually ready to paint. Also, you can see that I've already painted something in here. I'll get to that in a minute. I just wanted to quickly say that you can adapt this to other software. I'll leave that to your expertise, however, because I'm only covering it in Photoshop, but there should be no reason why you can't adapt this to other suites. And I'm using CS6, but you can use any version of Photoshop that you want. The only thing that I recommend you have, as usual, is a Wacom tablet. Once again, you're going to need to take advantage of the shape dynamics that having a tablet enabled in Photoshop will give you. Okay, so what I've actually already established here is a couple pairs of bones. You can see that I've painted them in. I would show you how to do this, but they took me a really long time to paint. They were kind of a pain in the butt, so to speak, and I'm still kind of messing with them. This is just to give you a path that you're going to follow. The gray bone in the front, that's the front wing, and then the black one in the back, that's going to be the back wing once we get to it. I'm going to start in front though. But also, it's not just to establish the path, but all wings of this sort, of this nature, have bones. They have like a wing bone that comes off of them and so forth, and it's usually covered in feathers and whatnot. So basically what I've got here going is I've already established my paths and I've already painted my bones. So you can go ahead and do that. But I also want to explain that wings are kind of tricky. It's actually been a very long time since I've painted them. I had somebody request that I do this tutorial because they saw an image that I did like 7 years ago, and they wanted to know how to paint the wings. But wings aren't something that I do a lot, especially wings of this nature. I tend toward more demon wings and so forth. But so, you know, it's kind of trial and error even as far as this tutorial goes for me, but basically we're going to have to use multiple layers to do this because, you know, wings are made up of several layers of the feathers, and, you know, you have the long ones, medium-sized ones, small ones, and ones that cover the bone and so forth. Just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going. So this can get really tricky, really difficult, really fast, and it can also become very messy, so I'm warning you. The tutorial might be just a tad bit lengthy because this is not the type of thing that takes 5 minutes to paint. It's probably going to take me a fair amount of work and a fair amount of trial and error, so do be warned. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go behind this front bone. As you can see, I've got my front bone here. And I'm going to add a new layer. This is basically so that I can paint behind the bone. Oh, it would help if I could actually show you. But in front of the girl, you can see where 3D space is established here. Sort of, but in 2D form. So that's where we want our layer to be, behind the bone, but in front of the girl. And the first row of feathers that we're going to paint is going to be the longest feathers. And I'm probably going to want them to be just a tad bit darker so that I can actually differentiate them from the bone. And should you have trouble seeing, you can always turn your background off, just to remind you that it's there. And since we're working in transparency, I have had already some trouble seeing the layers because of the background. It's just really, really bright and obtrusive. But anyway. And what I'm doing is I am just basically painting really long feathers. Establishing the base of the feather here. And actually these might be a little bit too long. We'll see what they look like when they're done. So I might have to adjust the scale on them. But for now, they look like they're pretty decent. So we'll just roll with it. And you want to follow the curvature of the bone. Because if you think about wings, and you think about how wings work, they kind of meld to the bone itself and follow a shape and so forth. So something that you definitely want to keep with here while you're painting them. Otherwise they won't look very organic or pliable like wings should actually look. Make sure you get your, you fill this in really good. And like I said, I might adjust this bone here to fit my wings. It just depends on if I like how everything turns out. I will say I don't like this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and redo it. And there, I think that's pretty good. And we want to keep this spacing here pretty like the same across the board. We don't want to go way too far up here and then have the crack be way down here and so forth. So we want to be consistent about what we're doing. Okay, the next layer I'm going to paint is actually going to go behind the girl right here. And I'm just going to paint this in. This is the back wing. And you may not actually see much of this, but, and actually I think I'm going to add some. Also be careful when you undo things in Photoshop, because Photoshop likes to change layers on you, like just happened to me. So you are going to want to be mindful of the layer that you're on, lest you accidentally paint on the wrong layer, which has happened to me more times than I care to admit. And I'm just kind of trying to make them look a little bit more wrappy. Like so. Make them a little bit more consistent. And I think that's pretty good. Okay, so first layer is down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make another layer. And this time I'm going to pick a little bit of a lighter gray just so that I can once again differentiate. How I do this might take me a couple minutes to get a feel for it. And like I said, basically what you're going to be doing is establishing multiple layers of these wings, or these feathers rather. Now, I mean, there's multiple ways that you can actually paint wings. This is not just, there's not just one way to do it, or any specific way that you have to go about it. You can always experiment if you would like and try out some different ways to do it. This is just the way that I've decided for this image is probably the best way to go about it, and to make it easier on you guys too, because you know it's your first try. I'm kind of used to messing with them and flying by the seat of my pants. And don't worry if you know you don't get something you like or whatever the first shutout. It takes patience and practice, and you just sometimes you have to just redo stuff even though you don't really want to. I'm always redoing things. You know, I can't even tell you how many times I've painted a full head of hair and then had to redo it because picky me, I didn't like it, so I decided I was just gonna delete it. But it just takes patience and practice, and sometimes you'll have to redo some stuff. Okay, now we're going on to the third layer, and at this point I'm going to go ahead and save my scene. You want to remember to save often, because if you don't save often you could lose your work. The one nice thing about Photoshop CS6 is that it does have what do you call it? Oh my god, I'm having a brain fart. It has a image recovery system where it backs up your current image so that in case it crashes, you don't lose it. So I don't actually worry about that too much anymore. But for your sake, if you're not using CS6 and you don't have that particular feature, and for the life of me, I can't recall what the actual term is. I'm having a brain farty kind of moment. But that's okay. You get the general idea. And so I'm just going to paint my third layer here, and I'm going to keep with my curvature. You notice that I'm painting in a lighter gray now. Like I said, I want to be able to tell the difference between these layers. If I had them all the same shade, it would just look like one big unconscionable blob, you know. So I decided that the best way to do this was to keep the grays. And you might actually have to get really small with your brush here. There. And let's see what we got. Actually, that's looking pretty decent. what you don't know is that I've actually already done this video once, and I did not like the last pair of wings that I was painting, so I had to start all over again. That's painful. But looks like second time is a charm. Actually, I'm going to come back here. Oops. And I'm going to finish off this layer back here. And add here. This is a little bit trickier, but if you go over your figure, it's okay because you can always erase. I'm actually behind her, so it's not really a big deal, but it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so we've got our feathers established. You might want to take note of any particularly chunky ones, like this one right here. I want it to be a little bit more pointy and less fat. And I know there's a word for that too, but don't ask me. It helps to have the right color. And you might like have to adjust this layer again now that you actually have your other feathers in, just to make it look like it. If it's too sparse or if it's too thin and you want it to look more consistent, you might have to go back and edit just a little bit, but that's not a big deal, and I decided I don't. And as always, the smudge tool is your friend, so you know you can use the erase tool, you can smudge stuff around. I like using the smudge tool because it allows me to move stuff or kind of straighten things out and make them look a little bit more refined. Okay, so I'm not going to be too picky here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to establish quills. Not actual quills, but just lines where quills would be on each of the feathers. Oops. And you want to try to be as straight and consistent as you can. As I've mentioned, I can't paint a straight line to save my life. I don't know why. So you're going to see probably a lot of undoing here, but it's probably because I go too fast. And then you're going to do this for each and every layer. Oops, I missed one. He's just hiding over there. You could barely see it. Make sure you try to keep it in the center. Oops. And it's okay if they're a little bit crookedy or a little bit wobbly or what have you, because this is all going to get edited anyway. And the last layer. I should follow my own. It's okay if it's not perfect advice. I can get really picky. And I try not to do that on the videos because I'm sure you guys don't want to sit here and watch me nitpick something to death. Or listen to me ramble on endlessly as I do so. But, yeah. Anyway. Okay, so, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to burn in some shadows and so forth. So I'm going to turn my shape dynamics off. That would be off. This is on, this is off. And I'm going to just kind of darken this up a little bit, because of course this is going to cast a shadow. And I actually might want to turn this down just a little bit, because I think that that even might be a little bit too dark. And you can see right here that I actually have a hole. It's alright though. No big deal. And you can actually follow the edges of the wings too, like so. So they look a little bit more rounded, and it gives them a little bit of dimension. But we're not even close to done, so. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing to this layer as we did to that one. Kind of burn in some shadows. Oops. And once again, the edges. When we get done, this is all going to be one color anyway. I only have them in separate grays, like I said, so that I could differentiate between the layers. And you'll notice that I use my Wacom tablet to actually control my pixel size. If you have a Wacom, you can actually do that by using the wheel on the Wacom tablet. But if you don't have one, you just kind of have to keep going up here and doing it the hard way. And now I'm going to make this look a little bit more shadowed, but not too much. As you can see, you don't want to make that look too like it's poking out. And now they're looking a little bit more wing-like, at least more wingy than they were looking before. But we still have quite a bit of work to do. We're not even close to done. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to this back layer. Though this back layer is going to be mostly dark, I still want to kind of fake the wings so that they look at least a little bit fluid with the front. I think that's good. Okay, so we've established our wings. We've painted in our quills, so to speak. I mean, we may go back at the end and actually stick three-dimensional quills in, but for right now, this is just to kind of establish each side of the feather so that we can actually make them look a little bit more feather-like. So now we want to, and actually, like I said, this might be even trial and error a little bit for me because it's been a while since I painted wings and I really don't want to mess this up at this point in time. But I'm going to start with a speckle brush. And I'm going to try that speckle brush out. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. That's why it's not doing anything. And I'm just going to come and I'm going to like just pull this around a little bit. And we don't want to do that. Oh, that's one layer too. Starting with the first layer, and we're just going to kind of make them look a little bit more feathery because, you know, feathers are not perfectly straight. They're kind of feathery and furry looking-ish and so forth. And I'm going to keep doing that on the additional layers as this one. Being mindful of how far I pull it or how much I deform it so that it melds and blends well with the layer below it. Obviously, you don't want to go to town too much. And I mean, like I said, there's multiple ways that you could go about painting wings. I mean, you could get really crazy and come in here and actually paint the feathers like we did in the first two tutorials. But that's the really, really long way, which I am entirely capable of, just it has to be at a certain point in mood for me. I can't just always paint that long and that much kind of thing. So for here, we're going to be really, really careful. We're going to zoom in for this because I can't really see, and we're going to tone this down a little bit because these feathers are much smaller. So they must be treated a little bit differently than the bigger feathers. And we're going to do the next one. When I'm done, I'll probably add another layer of feathers to the actual bone so that it's kind of blendy and it looks like they're kind of, you know, falling over the bone and so forth. And they may actually only paint one wing for this tutorial, because if I paint both of them, this could get really long. So we'll see. If I have enough time and I haven't used too much, I'll do the other wing. But if it's too lengthy, I may just show you the final image. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and raise my brush pixel size again. Now that I'm toward the top and the feathers are getting just a little bit bigger. And you can see that as we're painting this, it's kind of already like painting the lines that we want into it. Just a little bit. And these are kind of also like how you would paint leaves, just incidentally. I mean, not exactly like this, because leaves are obviously not too feathery, but it's the same kind of lines and principle and shape and so forth. You would just have to not use the smudge tool as much, and just a side note. Am I recording? Oh, okay. Just checking that I'm not doing all this for naught. Usually I have a little notification in the lower screen and it wasn't showing. And if you're thinking to yourself, good God, this is a lot of work, you would absolutely be correct. It is a lot of work. Okay, so our wings are actually looking a little bit more like wings. So at this point, I'm going to take a drink and I'm going to save my file. I recommend you do the same. Okay. Oh, I missed that one right there. At this point, you can, you know, take a look at your image and make sure that you're not like me, missed stuff, or if there's anything that you want to kind of tweak. You'll want to do that now. And they're looking actually pretty good and definitely more wing-like as we go along. Okay, so at this point, what do I want to do? I think I'm going to go ahead and dodge. Well, you know what? Actually, let me kind of mess with this one a little bit because I want the lines to be a little more prevalent. Like I said, at this point, you want to just look it over, mess with anything. I'm kind of just getting some lines in there, and you can actually turn the mode to darken on your smudge tool, and this will actually pull the dark line a little bit so that you are only smudging the darkness. You don't have to, but you can. And what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to like that. Go ahead and make this a little bit more prominent. And you might also notice that once you get going with this, that it might become a little bit too smudgy. So like you can always duplicate the layer to build it up, kind of thing. I'm not going to do that right now because I usually do that toward the end. But if you think that, you know, they're just a little bit too transparent in certain places, you can always do that. And I'm just kind of going in here and adding some shadow in certain places because I want to establish, I mean, I don't really have a prominent light source. Actually, I do, and I'm not following it. So I'm going to redo that. But you do want to follow your lighting. So in my case, I have a very strong spotlight in her face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the light with the wings and make the shadows fall toward the back, and then with a strong spotlight dodged into the front. You'll see what I mean. And then I take my dodge tool and do the other side like so. Just like that. And then you do the same thing to the other layers, of course. I'm just going through and darkening up the quill a little bit. And darkening the back side here. Like so, and then I'm gonna dodge the front side like so. Oops, too much. Final layer. Oops. Need the burn tool. And once again, dodge the one side, or burn around one side rather, dodge the other. Honestly, with wings, they're kind of nice in that you don't have to get too detail-y with them for them to actually look decent. just because of the nature of them and, you know, the way that they, you know, generally tend to look, they tend to have pretty basic features like we have just painted here, and yet still look pretty detailed. I guess because, you know, there are so many feathers to them that it looks pleasantly detailed. Okay, so we've painted now our wings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. Do I want to merge these? No, I don't think I'm ready to merge yet. What I'm going to do is try to mess with the contrast a little bit. Looking pretty good. Okay, another thing that I want to do is I kind of do want to maybe add a little bit of highlight. Trying to sort how I want to do this. I don't like that. Let's go with this. Oops. Let's turn this way down. No, not down far enough. Basically, I kind of want to make them look a little bit shiny. Like they have some specularity to them. Kind of like we do with the hair. And at this point, you're just kind of flipping back and forth between the different layers and so forth. Now let's see if we can add a little bit of color to these. I want them to be a color that I call comic black. Basically, it's almost like a teal color, but desaturated and really dark. like so. And I always add my color in by using this little doodad here, because it generally lends a more even look to it. And actually that I think maybe needs a little bit more blue. There we go. And if you wanted to, you could even, like, you know, variegate each level of feathers and make like the top layer darker, or I mean rather lighter, and so forth. You could even get crazy with it and paint each feather differently and like different colors and so forth. I'm obviously not going to do all that, but I think at this point I'm going to merge this down just because it's easier to deal with at this point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a new file so that I don't overwrite my last one. This is, you know, saving in progressions or stages. Just, you know, allows you to be able to not overwrite when you're going off on a tangent or whatever. I'm trying to decide where, if I want to paint in some lines or what I want to do with this. Actually, I think what I'm going to do with it, I was going to try to make the edges really light. But I don't know if it's going to cooperate with me enough to do that. Maybe. Actually, you know what? I'm going to keep this layered still for the moment while I do this, just because I can't do it with them merged. Let me see if I like that. No, I don't. Revert. And it's gone. That's another thing, using revert is bloody brilliant. I think my highlight is just a little bit too low for my liking. Okay. Oops. Wrong button. I think I kind of want to play with the color a little bit just to see. Eh, I don't know. One of those things. You just gotta mess with stuff. I think that's just a little bit too dark. I don't want it to be that dark. Oh, look at that. I didn't do anything to it. Okay, so we've pretty much got the feathers at least somewhat established. I'll just leave them like that. I actually think those match the scene pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint my bone in, if I can figure out where I put it. And this is simple. This is just a question of adding a shadow along the edges. And of course at the back here, which we want this to be a little bit more of a prominent shadow. Oops. Let's not get messy. There's another easier way to do this as well. You can actually, you know what, I don't like how that looks. You can actually go to blending options and add an inner shadow, and it'll do almost the same thing, but I find that this has better results and you can tweak this, whereas if you have the blending drop shadow or inner shadow or any of that done to it, it won't look as finished and you can't really edit it unless you merge the layer down onto a different layer so that the blending options are no longer prevalent, or not prevalent, it's not the word that I want, but active. Yeah, that's the word I want. And you want to be really inconsistent with this highlight that you can see I'm adding right now, because the more inconsistent you are, the more that it adds kind of a detail to it. Hard to explain what I mean, but it kind of gives it a texture and a bump almost to some degree. I'm going to go ahead and darken that. And what I may end up doing, like I said, is painting. That's too much blue. I may go ahead and paint some feathers over it, or maybe I just leave it the way that it is, because I mean honestly it's not very bad and it looks okay without them, but the option is always there if that's what you want to do. I'm gonna try to keep the video relatively short. I just kind of wanted to show you guys how to establish the sweeping look to them and how to paint the feathers in and so forth. I mean, and by all means, you know, you should experiment and not necessarily even follow my instructions. Mine are just like a basis for you to go from. You know, you should absolutely kind of experiment and see if you can come up with something that's better or, you know, something that's easier, you know, and so forth. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, oh, I see what I did there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the color to this one. I don't think I'm going to, you can see how I just totally faked that. Obviously, these wings don't go anywhere where you're going to see them. So I just kind of made them look like they were wings without actually making them look like they were wings, if that makes any sense. And I think that looks pretty good. You can also, like, you know, tweak the contrast if you decide that maybe it's too contrasty. And there are different modes for contrast, so be mindful of that. I mean, I want them to be relatively dark, but not too dark. Yeah, actually, I like that better. And I'm going to do the same thing to the bone over here. And another thing that you can do if you're feeling particularly lazy is that you can actually duplicate this layer and totally cheat the other wing. How you do so, you need to be very careful about, because obviously it wasn't painted to that bone. Crap. And I just want to shrink that down, make it look like it's coming off of the other one. Might actually pull it. Yeah, I think that looks generally better. And just go ahead and you can, oops, paint this wing bone to match the other. Actually, I may just end up leaving it like this instead of painting the other one. I mean, it depends on how gung-ho you are about your image. I mean, sometimes I'll paint the entirety, and sometimes I'll just be lazier about it. And being is that I just did an image yesterday, and I did a whole lot of painting in that, I'm generally feeling lazier about it. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and fake it this time. And there you are. You have two fancy angelic or raven-like wings. Ta-da! And I mean, like I said, you know, if you decide that maybe they're just a little bit too big or what have you, you can always come in here and adjust them like so. Just make them smaller, a little bit more, whatever. I don't think I have all my layers selected, but anyway, so you get the general idea. I mean, there's really no right or wrong way to do wings. I mean, this should give you at least a basis to go from so that you can get something that actually looks pretty good without getting too detail oriented and spending a whole ton of time on an image. I mean, unless of course you want to, but then you could always just experiment. You could paint in some lines here. You could add in, you know, more dodging and more birding along those lines and so forth. For me, I think these wings are actually pretty good, and they're good enough for the image. And like I said, I'm, you know, pretty tired from doing the one yesterday, so I'm at this point going to call it done. I might actually go ahead and add in some color to catch the background, the ambient color. This is, you know, what is called ambient lighting. So like the wings should be catching flecks of red and so forth from the light that's beaming off of the background and everything. But so I mean, you can kind of do that on your own. You just, you know, add a new layer like so, just to quickly demonstrate how that's done. What color do I want to go with? Like an orange. And then you just set the mode to, okay, what, am I crazy? Oh, it's on saturation, that's why. I was like, that's not supposed to happen. But you would just basically like just add in dabs of red as if it's, you know, picking up the color. And you don't even have to be really exceedingly neat about this, because what you're going to do when all is said and done is you're going to blur out this layer and using Gaussian blur to kind of fade it in. Let me just demonstrate for you real quick like what I mean, and see how it picks up just enough of the background color to give it a little bit more depth and ambient light. And you would only like necessarily do this on certain parts. You may not even do it on all of it. You know what I'm saying? Just like where the light would actually be hitting it. And it also kind of gives your wings a little bit more of a variegated look to them. And so forth. Let's add some in there. Just gives it a little bit more color to it. You might even like go as far as, you know, adding some more dodge to it. Let me see. I actually really like those, but I think that's just too much. But just to give you an idea of, you know, how you would want to recolor this so that it has ambient in it. I mean, you can really do anything you want to your images in Photoshop. That's what makes Photoshop so great, because the possibilities are really endless. Anyway, so that's our tutorial for today. I hope you learned something and had fun. Thanks, and I will catch you next time.